Preseason game number 1 is in the books for the Buffalo Bills, and we saw a lot. I'm here to give you my takes today on the Ralph Rant. Let's go.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant, your source for hard-hitting Buffalo Bills takes. Now, here's your host of the Ralph Rant, that veteran watcher of generations of Bills teams, the prophet who predicted Josh Allen's greatness, that opinionated so-and-so you've walked out on parties because of, the Ralph.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant. I am your host, the Ralph. Thank you ever so much for being here today. We are discussing the Buffalo Bills' first preseason contest that was just concluded versus the New York Giants. One thing we won't be discussing is the score or the outcome of the game because they don't matter. It's preseason. But before we get into it all, I want to thank all of the new subscribers, all of the viewers, all of the great commenters we've had on the channel. We've gotten great insights on some of the subject matter we've been talking about, and we've gotten some wonderful compliments on the show itself. Very much appreciated. I promise we'll keep it coming. And one other item to add in, we now have Ralph Rant t-shirts available. I want to gauge the need for those, if it's out there, by your comments. And if so, we're going to get them into mass production. This is an original here, and we'll have it available. It's also got design on the back. It says, "Let's go Buffalo," with a couple of other good items. So we have those coming up, but let's talk about what we're going to discuss today concerning the preseason game. And I'm going to start it off with discussing our shiny new defensive line. I forecasted about a month and a half or 2 months ago in a video concerning the advent of Ryan Nielsen's defensive line scheme and the new players that have been brought in via free agency and the draft. So we'll talk about what that looked like in the first time out on the field. Then we'll talk about Ray Davis and the offense, and I have titled it "Ray Can't Cook Like Cook." So we'll talk about that, but there was a lot of good things going on with the offense also. Then the depth of the Buffalo Bills could only be described as depth charging. We have some studs on this team, and there is great talent. There are guys that need to learn, but I'm telling you, if you want to see what depth or lack of depth looks like, go watch some of the other preseason games that are airing on the NFL Network. Then I'm going to give you some shout-outs and shout-downs of some of the things I liked and didn't like from the first game. And then finally, I'm going to finish it with required final rants. I've got several of them, and I've got one especially I'm saving for last for the NFL, and I'm going to stick it to them because they've got it coming. All that and more right now on the Ralph Rant. Go! All right, let's get into this shiny new defensive line of the Buffalo Bills. But before I discuss that position group or any other on the team, it must be reiterated what Sean McDermott said in his press conference following the game. He was asked on a scale of 0 to 10 how much game planning the Bills do for preseason contests. And without hesitation, he simply said, well, it's between 0 and 1. There is no game planning during the preseason, especially early, but moreover throughout the entirety, because the preseason, shortened now to 3 games, is entirely about looking at individual efforts on the team. And the individual efforts are important because we want to see how players actually play without having to think about the scheme they're in and think about what they need to do in a particular case. If you remove the thinking aspect of it and allow players to simply react with their ability in the preseason, then we get a very good idea of what that player might be capable of, especially after he learns the system. This is why there is no game planning in preseason, and we should not be looking for some of the things like I mentioned in the Ryan Nielsen video I did, predicting what this defense and especially the defensive line would look like. You're not going to see those things in preseason. You're not going to see stunts or twists. You're not going to see defensive line games. I think I did see one simulated pressure by Matt Milano where then he backed off into coverage, but there was not a lot of that. So having said that, what did the defensive line players actually look like? Well, Groot looked great as usual. Daquan Jones, nothing different there. I don't think he is quite as violent and aggressive as some of the other ball players the Bills have because he is a pure one-tack. Ed Oliver, on the other hand, was a beast. He launched off the line at supersonic speed. He was into the backfield so quickly. Very, very impressed with that. And how can you not be impressed with Joey Bosa going out there and playing basically first through third down, and with pressure applied, definitely we could see his speed, but he had a couple of run stops where he was chasing down the back from the far side, crossing the line of scrimmage and then diving down the line of scrimmage, and that looked really good. So I believe Joey Bosa looked great, and I think that Joey Bosa's season will be different than his previous seasons in terms of injury, because on those other occasions, in those other seasons where he was injured, he did not have the likes of Will Greenberg, the Buffalo Bills strength and conditioning coach. And I am quite certain that Will is going to do wonders with Joey Bosa and manage him so we do have him at the end of the season and the playoffs. I'm counting on that. Now, we can move on to some of the other groups that were out there, and Michael Hoyt and Larry Ogunjobi both looked great. Many people are saying Michael Hoyt looked like the best player on the field for the Bills. He did. He was extremely aggressive. Actually, I saw in a couple of cases where maybe there was a little bit too much aggression. We all know the story about Bills defensive ends flying up the field and getting past the point where they can get back at the quarterback. But hopefully interior pressure will help that. I saw that by Hoyt on a couple of occasions, and then I saw on one occasion he was a little bit aggressive and lost the edge on a running play. However, he did look great, and it's good to see people reacting quickly and moving, even if there are mistakes, because McDermott said it clearly that preseason is all about failing and failing forward. Now, Larry Ogunjobi looks as good as advertised. He looked aggressive. I liked seeing him and other defensive linemen getting their hands up in the passing lane when the Giants were definitely trying to execute a quick passing game in some way to try to mitigate the Bills' pass rush that looked as aggressive as I have seen it. I just don't recall seeing defensive linemen look this aggressive. And then we have to get into the draft choices. TJ Sanders and Deion Walker, as advertised. TJ Sanders looks fast. The hand violence, and I'm going to talk about this more a little bit later, but the hand violence of TJ Sanders and the swim moves he's using, very, very impressed with that, because I was able to counterpoint that with seeing a couple of other defensive linemen that were not doing that as well. And we'll talk about that later. So TJ Sanders looks like he's money. He is going to be great for a long time. And Deion Walker. My God. I'm 6'4", and Deion Walker's arms look like my legs. This is a mountain of a man. And the dancing bear characterization is accurate. This guy is light on his feet. And he was going up against the very, very decent Giants offensive line. The Giants have had good line play on both sides of the ball for a couple of years now. Nothing bad about that at all. So Deion Walker was playing against some competition. And guys, he's making it look easy a couple of times. And he's just learning. He is just learning. But I think that's going to be amazing. And I still maintain that this defense, by week 11, as I predicted months ago, will draw comparisons to the defense of the 85 Bears. Yeah, I said it again. Now, to continue, we had, and I mentioned this before with Larry Ogunjobi, I really like seeing hands going up by these defenders when we were in a situation of a quick passing game, especially when Jackson Dart was in the game for the Giants and was getting throws out quickly. In fact, TJ Sanders' best rush, where he nearly got a sack, was on that long touchdown throw where Dane Jackson got beat in the end zone. Now, other than that, I saw a couple of other interesting things, and I saved these for last because they are of interest. One thing I saw with great interest was the fact that the Bills' defensive line at times was lining up nearly a yard off the ball. And on one hand, people would say, well, why are you doing that? You're just creating more distance between you and the football, you and the quarterback, you and the running back, whatever it may be. But I think with the speed and aggression and violence that these defensive linemen bring, that being a yard off the ball gives them a bit of a running start and a bit of decision time as to which way they want to move and how they want to attack. I thought that was very interesting, and that was a very deliberate thing. Now, there's been other comments made about the defensive tackle pairings that we saw yesterday. And people were trying to draw some sort of conclusion about depth chart, about who is in charge or who's not, who's better and who isn't, based on what those defensive lineman pairings were. I, on the other hand, looked at it at a slightly different way, because what I saw, of course, was our starters, Groot, Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, and Joey Bosa. Then the second group that was out there was Michael Hoyt, Dwayne Carter, Larry Ogunjobi, and A.J. Epinesa. And then the third group, we had Javon Solomon, T.J. Sanders, Deion Walker, and Landon Jackson. And again, the conclusions were made based on what the defensive tackle pairings were, but I'm talking about the entire group of four. And what jumps out at me, which I haven't heard stated by anybody else, is that the lineup of Hoyt, Carter, Ogunjobi, and Epinesa is the one that has the two players that will be suspended for the 6 games, Hoyt and Ogunjobi. So what precisely might that mean for Dwayne Carter and A.J. Epinesa? It seems as though Ryan Nielsen places a great deal of importance on the interplay of defensive linemen. We've talked about the fact where the timing of various stunts, various games, maybe twists that are being pulled, the timing of those needs to be worked out very well. Because the defensive line, although I said earlier in the preseason we're talking about individual efforts, the defensive line must work together very well to succeed in Ryan Nielsen's system. And though we're looking at individual efforts now, I cannot help but place importance on what those groupings were, because if you've got those groups together and you're planning on having them work together because they learn their timing together just like an offensive line would, I don't know quite what that means for Dwayne Carter and A.J. Epinesa, because the two that they're playing with will be gone for 6 games when we get started with the regular season. So that's my take on the defensive line. Now we're going to move on to the offense with a little bit of bad news, but a lot of good news. Certainly one of the biggest stories in camp this season has been the hold-in of running back James Cook. I even put a video out on this last week suggesting that a trade might be a possibility. That certainly wouldn't be my choice. My choice would be for James Cook and the Bills to somehow get together and get him on the field. And we saw why yesterday. Because Ray Davis can't cook like Cook. Now, certainly Ray Davis has shown he is got great promise. He did some great things last season. He was the lead back versus the Jets and did very well. But Ray Davis demonstrated that he couldn't even keep his feet on his first carry, and that also happened with Brandon Codrington. I hope the guys realize, yes, you've been practicing on grass. The Ralph is artificial turf, unfortunately. So hopefully that's gotten together. But frankly, Ray Davis did not look very good. And I don't know if there was any kind of pressure he had put on himself for his opportunity to step in because of what the possibility of James Cook not being with the Bills this season might look like. And I'm going to give him a little bit of a break for that part of it, but it did not look good. It did not look good at all. Probably the best thing he did on the field all day was kick the extra point. And I'll get in later on the significance of that. But will stick now with the offense, and I believe that we need James Cook. Now, Ty Johnson looked great. He had a couple of decent, solid runs. He's always going to be strong, but he is your third down back. You should not consider him the lead back. Other than that, we saw that, the Bills were playing against a pretty good Giants defensive line. It's actually noted that it could be amongst the best defensive lines in the league this season. So that was actually good to see. Good to see that the Bills had to contend with that in the first preseason game. And it was Mitch Trubisky at quarterback to start. And the word is in the streets that Mitch and Mike White had pretty similar performances. I disagree slightly. I think Mitch was playing against better defenders of the Giants during the point he was on the field. He had some more pressure. I think he reacted better. All of that was good to see. We don't usually put a lot of stock into backup quarterbacks with the Bills because when you have Josh Allen, who is the best and most durable quarterback in the history of the NFL, you don't worry as much about that. You're worried more about the other guys in the quarterback room being guys that Josh Allen likes. But my point is that seeing Mitch Trubisky perform as well as he did, and look, Trubisky has got the tools. He's been in the league a long time now. He's more seasoned. He knows what he's saying. He was a very high pick, of course, when he came out. And the thing I like about that, even though we might not see him the entire regular season, we hope we don't see him at all the entire regular season unless Josh is sitting down in the fourth quarter because the score is so lopsided in favor of the Bills. But the thing I like seeing him in preseason for is with the ability that he showed yesterday and the number of receivers we have, and especially young receivers, it is excellent in a game situation, even a preseason, to get those receivers some experience with a decent quarterback. We know we've had bad backups in the past. We've actually had seasons where we have signed a camp arm for the very last game. And that's fine. That gets you through. That keeps Josh Allen off the field. But it also doesn't give our new young receivers good work that they are getting with Mitch Trubisky being able to perform as well as he has. And we saw some of that yesterday. You saw Christian Wilkerson with a one-handed grab on the sideline that he had 1 foot out, or that's a big gainer. You saw Tyrell Shavers with a couple of big catches, and we'll talk about him more when we get into another segment here. But overall, I think you saw some good things from Trubisky. Even the play action that resulted when in the touchdown when Dawson Knox came from the right side of the formation, did a chip block, and just snuck down the line of scrimmage and was by himself for the throw from Trubisky. So that is valuable. Having the good quarterback being able to play snaps for the majority of the preseason is helpful for a lot of these young guys. Other than that, we saw some good things also from Dalton Kincaid. He had a pretty nasty-looking chip block before he went out and caught one ball. He looked very aggressive and physical after the catch. That was good to see. Of course, that's his first handle on a football field since that AFC title game. Then Josh Palmer also looked very good, getting open for Mitch Trubisky when there was the pressure from Abdul Carter that surprisingly got a little bit past Deion Dawkins. We'll talk about that later. But that looked good from Palmer. And then also, we did not see much else besides just the regular zone blocking and nothing too detailed on the offensive line. But we did see a couple of pin and pull situations, and we saw Saibo come out of his left guard position and level someone on the other side of the formation in a running play that I think resulted in Ty Johnson having some good success. So offensively, you've got to be pretty satisfied. We need James Cook back. Without Josh Allen on the field, you're not really going to see. But with Mitch Trubisky, we were able to execute some things and see some things. So That's positive, and it's positive for the rest of the preseason because guys need to get minutes on that offense with a quarterback who can perform somewhat. And we want to keep Josh Allen off the field. Let's keep him off the field for the preseason. There's no need to get him out there. Let's move on. Now, Sean McDermott has always made a big point about stating that the most important part of a football team is what goes on in the trenches, the offensive and defensive lines. That's where the games are won and lost. And you've got to say that they have done great on the depth with both of those squads. We've got the 5 starters returning, and Spencer Brown didn't even play yesterday. And the guy that would have come in for him, Tylen Grable, is in concussion protocol. So Spencer Brown was replaced by Ryan Vandermark. And then you've got other great players on that line. Alec Anderson, he's out with a knee scope at this point. Cedric Van Pran Granger has had a calf issue and hasn't been on the field yet. But we know he is very strong. And then you brought in guys like Chase Lunt, who, although he's a late-round pick, did some great things in that ball game. We're going to talk about those a little bit later. So, offensive line-wise, the Bills are doing great in terms of depth. And then on the defensive side, we've already talked about 3 separate groups of 2 edges and 2 tackles that the Bills put on the field. 3 separate squads of edges and tackles. And I got to tell you, I saw great things from every one of those. So the depth of those lines, the depth of the trenches is huge. I think that's going to go a long way for the Bills this season. So yeah, the depth is charging. Let's wait for it to explode. So let's get into it. On the shout-outs, the very first name that must be mentioned is Matt Milano. Matt freaking Milano. Matt looks like Matt of old. That very first play from scrimmage by the Giants where Matt fires off, I don't know if it was the first or second play, but Matt fires off from that weak side linebacker position, heads toward the sideline, and makes the tackle on the receiver basically for no gain. And Matt looked great, and that form looked just like it did when he was tackling the dummy in practice in the film I saw the other day. So Matt Milano, yes, definitely doing well. Who else do we have here? I'm going to bring up TJ Sanders and Deion Walker once again. Because I got to tell you, the hand violence that these guys demonstrated on the line of scrimmage and in getting into the backfield, I know I discussed them earlier when we were talking about the shiny new defensive line, but they have to be called out again. I've been screaming about game wreckers all this offseason. I think Sanders and Walker are going to be game wreckers, and they're playing side by side. God help the opponents. Now, a couple of other items. Deion Dawkins and the code words. Now, I normally eschew sideline interviews during the preseason. In fact, they're unwatchable unless it's the Bills. But when it is the Bills, you have to watch it. And of course, Trey White was a sideline interview yesterday, but Deion Dawkins, in talking about the code words and sounds, such as peanut or Rochester, that they have developed, and the line knows so well that they can just utter these on the field, and teams have no idea what they're talking about. That's pretty tight. And I thought it was great, and I think everybody watching thought it was great, except for Josh Allen. Except for Josh Allen, who exhibited the biggest yawn I've ever seen from a ball player on the sideline in recent history. So, what's that tell you? Josh needs to be on the field. Preseason's got to be tough for him because he is not going to get much time. Who else? Tyrell Shavers. Now, we saw Tyrell get injured in camp, and it looked like it was a horrifying injury. There was all sorts of fear. Fortunately, it wasn't as bad as thought. He was back on his feet in a couple of days with that ankle wrapped. And boy, did we see him out on the field yesterday. Couple of great catches. He led the Bills in receptions, I think he had 2 for 70. The long ball was great. And there was people saying, oh, he should have gotten into the end zone. Well, if you didn't have to slow down for the ball from Mitch Trubisky, he would have just walked into the end zone. Now, people are talking about this receiver room and these solid guys who are probably going to make the team and guys that are on the bubble like Tyrell Shavers, who has been so for the last 2 seasons and is yet again here. But here you've got a receiver with great hands. He might not be explosive and twitchy off the line, but boy, does he get up to speed quickly. And the other thing is, he is 6'4" and 211 pounds. And you know who was 6'4" and 215 pounds? Mac Hollins, which is why Tyrell Shavers will make this team, because he is great on special teams, absolutely necessary. And that receiving ability and his size make him sort of a different quantity in the receiving room. So a huge shout out for Tyrell Shavers. Also, Chase Lunt, left tackle. Chase played left tackle for a short bit in the second half. Chase has never played that position, I don't believe. Now, Chase comes in as sort of an dimensionally odd left tackle or tackle of any position in the NFL. First of all, he's tall. He's 6'7". He's got short arms, not quite Tyrannosaurus Rex, but he's got short arms, but he moves very well. And the Bills had him at left tackle yesterday where they ran a gap scheme run, and he pulled from his position from the left tackle and then went to the right side of where the center would be and laid somebody out. Chase Lunt looks pretty good, and I think there's going to be a spot for him because the Bills love offensive linemen. Now, another shout out, and I've talked about Deion Walker a number of times, but there was a play yesterday, I believe it was a 2nd and 10. It was a running play by the Giants. Deion was on the defensive right side playing a 3-tech. The run was over to the offensive right. Deion came from across the field. He did not make the tackle. It was made just before. But there was a lineman in front of that tackle that was coming along and tried to come in and hit Deion. And Deion Walker essentially flicked this guy on his back with his hands. He pancaked him, and it didn't even look like he hardly touched him. Deion Walker is a beast. A beast. Then, the kicking game. Brad Robbins, looking good. I think he averaged about 57, 58 yards. He got some very deep kicks. Did have one touchback. The holds were good, so that looks good. And, of course, we know the punter situation, the holding is almost as important, if not more important, than the punting side of it. So he did very well holding for Ray Davis, who, interestingly, did kick one extra point. And, of course, I was actually at that game when the Carolina kicker was injured in pregame, and Carolina could not kick extra points, had to go for 2. It was difficult for them. So I see why Sean McDermott might want to have an emergency kicker. But I also thought it was interesting with Caden Davis. Now, Caden Davis, of course, is the rookie kicker that was brought in to do some kicking in the preseason in Tyler Bass's stead, because Tyler Bass has a pelvic soreness or a pelvic injury. I think it happened kicking on the wet field, which was the last day he actually kicked in practice. And perhaps Caden Davis is not being considered since they didn't even give him the first extra point. It was given to Ray Davis. But I got to tell you, Caden Davis walked out onto that field. You just didn't feel the sense of fear exuded by the kicker. We know that Ty Bass got past the problems last season, and it really took off for him when he hit the 61-yarder versus the Dolphins to win the game. But I just thought it interesting that Caden Davis just stepped on the field. It's like, okay, snap, set down, kick, up, good. A lot of confidence. He hit everything that he kicked. So a lot of shout-outs, but there are some shout-downs. We had pressure, but no sacks. We want to see that improve. the screen passes were gashing the Bills, just gashing the Bills. But I think part of that was the fact that you had both starting safeties out. And so in their stead, you've got guys that are backups playing there, which then means towards the end of the game, the further you get into the game, you've got guys still further down the depth chart that are in there. So I believe the screens were a problem for the Bills. They've been a problem in the past. That is something that needs to be shored up. I'm mitigating it just a little bit by the fact that we did not have the safeties in. Another kind of concerning thing was Deion Dawkins getting worked by Abdul Carter. I don't know. Worked might be kind of a strong term, but on that one pass rush rep, Carter just did a slight fake to the outside, maybe even just head, and then he crossed Deion's face to the inside. And Deion was able to get one hand on him and keep him off Trubisky, who spun out of that. And I believe that's the play where he hit Josh Palmer in the middle of the field with a throw kind of across the grain a little bit and throwing from his right side while rolling left. So that looked pretty good. But Abdul Carter is going to be a problem. I'm glad the Bills do not play the NFC East this season. Although I will say that there was another rep where Abdul Carter was in there and Dawson Knox locked him up and he wasn't going anywhere. So I think if you neutralize his speed, and I think Deion got just a little bit surprised by that, I bet Deion would do a little better next time he faces him, if and when that occurs. And then the secondary was kind of porous. There was a lot of completions. And again, I talked about the fact that without the starting safeties in, you had this trickle effect of backups playing and further backups playing deeper and deeper into the game. So hoping that's going to get shored up also. You can't take too much from a first preseason game, but that was a bit of a concern, including the fact that Trey was setting up a little bit deep and I think allowing some of those more shallow throws. Now, I don't know if they had him back there purposefully or if he is just trying to forestall getting blown past by a very fast receiver where he needs to create a little bit of space in order to cover for that. But that was also a situation. And then my next shout down is really for both Dwayne Carter and Landon Jackson. Dwayne Carter, we've heard about his not progressing perhaps as well as the Bills want. And then Landon Jackson didn't have the greatest day. He was lined up offside on the interception. And then his rushes were, he made moves, he was fast, but the thing I saw the most is the lack of hand violence by Landon Jackson. And he was allowing blockers to get into his body rather than keeping his hands out in front of him and fighting away with that hand violence. And once you get a blocker into you, and if you're unable to shed, it's difficult. So shedding is a good skill, but the better skill is keeping them off you altogether. I have a feeling he will do better. Hopefully, we'll also see that from Dwayne Carter. We've got to understand that we do have Ryan Nielsen in the house now, so there is going to be some learning, and the Bills are totally willing for these guys to fail first. Landon Jackson will get a great deal out of that. I don't expect it to stay like that, but he does have things to learn. The last item I want to give is a shout down, but I forgot him in the shout up, so we'll do them both, is Jackson Hawes. The shout up was he blocked quite well. He basically acquitted himself very well in run blocking, although I did see one play where the defensive end got on the wrong side of him and got on his inside shoulder, and he was unable to get around him and seal that block. But other than that, he looked pretty good, but then he did have the drop. And if you recall an earlier show of mine, I talked about the fact that he was catching everything thrown at him in OTAs. I think we'll get that back. And again, I can't stress enough that the play action component that exists with having a tight end who is very capable of blocking and threatening for a run scheme and then just doing a quick hit and leaking out and catching a pass. So I'm hoping that still comes about for Jackson Hawes. And that does it for the shout-ups and shout-downs, but stay tuned for the final rants, because I've saved the best for last. Because we saw yesterday in action something that the NFL did in response to the AFC title game last January 26th, where Josh Allen was denied a first down when it seemed clearly obvious that he got one. And there was a big, big deal about the measurement and how we're not seeing where the ball is and how it can't be measured and so forth. And the NFL is promising to do something magical, digital, electronic, to be able to spot the ball and get the human element out of it, get the old refs out of it who might not have seen a play. This NFL moves very quickly. So they did that, and I don't even know what it's called. I don't care to know what it's called. The system looks something like you see in a tennis match where the ball is striking a line. And they're able to tell where the ball strikes, whether it's on the line or not, and it's worked pretty well for tennis. So that technology was adopted and brought into the NFL to be able to determine where the ball is precisely with respect to the line to gain, which of course was the huge issue in the playoffs last season. It was the issue that brought up the fact of refs being on the take and cheating and games being fixed. I mean, you remember it went nuts. So the NFL is going to go and fix this with this camera system that takes 30 seconds of waiting and everyone looking at the big video display to find out if the ball is 1 foot and 1 inch or 1 foot and 2 inches from the line to gain. If it's that far, why do you even need the cameras? You need it for when it's close. But that's not even the rant. Because on this particular play where that was going to be measured, the play had ended somewhere near the sideline, outside of the numbers, probably 4 or 5 yards from the sideline. And the ball had gotten spotted, ready for the cameras. And what happened next? The linesman picks up the ball and runs it 20 yards to the hash mark. Are you shitting me? Is it the whole idea to mark the ball where it is and not introduce the error of the refs? Wasn't a linesman that was coming down the line showing Josh Allen at a first down and then kind of moved over as he got closer and then was overruled by the guy on the other side? You actually moved a football by hand without measuring it with this new system? I'll never drop an F-bomb on this program again, but it was required here. And until the NFL figures out how to put a miniature chip armed with accelerometer, such as an iPhone has, to where that chip knows the orientation of the ball, and that chip knows the geometry of the ball in whatever orientation that is, and then you've got some sort of digital grid on the field that tells you where that football was at that moment. And then you could actually back up the frames of that to a point where a knee is down. When you get to that point, call me about using a digital method to check line to gain. And until then, get the chains back, because that is a joke. A joke. But I'll tell you it's not a joke. Everyone who's come to this channel. So thank you again so much. That's going to do it for this session of the Ralph Rant. I am the Ralph. I will be back. Go Bills. I'm out.